Welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving into a really fascinating paradox, and it comes straight from some compelling source material breaking down the core ideas of the Christian faith. It's all about this deep, almost uncomfortable tension, going from clinging to what feels totally safe to willingly burying yourself in the absolute messiness of the real world. We'll be looking at human behavior, the idea of ultimate justice, and the framework for total internal transformation. So get ready, because this is going to challenge some pretty common assumptions about religion and belief.
Okay, let's dive right into this. The text throws a seriously provocative question at us right out of the gate. The word gospel literally translates to good news. But the teachings of Jesus present this massive, almost counterintuitive challenge. To find your life, you have to lose it. It asks you to deny yourself, ditch your old ways, and basically let your old identity die. So how on earth can a message demanding that kind of radical, total self-denial be considered good news? Well, to figure that out, we first need to strip away how most people, both back then and even right now today, naturally view religion.
And that brings us to a massive contrast between what we can call transactional faith and the true gospel presented in the text. Look, the default baseline for human belief systems across almost all cultures is totally transactional. You know the drill. Follow the rules, appease the deity, and boom, you get a good life in return. It's kind of like a cosmic vending machine. But what Jesus was actually pitching, it wasn't about gaining earthly riches or just living a comfortable, easy life. It was a radical call to leave the old self completely behind, to step entirely away from past sins and undergo a total, ground-up transformation. It's not about just adding a nice blessing to the life you already have. It's about trading your life in completely.
Which brings us to Act 1, The Drowning Man.
To really get this, the source material uses this incredibly vivid metaphor. Imagine humanity as someone who is totally exhausted, sinking in deep water, and completely unable to save themselves from their own destructive nature. Suddenly, a rescue rope is tossed down from above. It's a totally free gift. All the drowning person has to do is just reach out and grab it. But here's the huge psychological barrier, and honestly the absolute core of our paradox today. The drowning person isn't empty-handed. They're desperately clinging to a piece of debris, a broken wooden plank. To grab the rope that will actually save them, they literally have to open their hands. They have to let go of the plank they think is keeping them afloat. And honestly, that's terrifying.
So what exactly are these broken planks in our real everyday lives? Well, they're our past ideologies. They're the illusions of our own personal morality. That little voice saying, well, I'm a good enough person. They're our wealth, our societal status, or that deep driving need for power and control. And sometimes they are simply deep-rooted habits that we're just comfortable with, even if we know they're slowly destroying us. Releasing these planks, it literally feels like giving up your life. But the argument the text makes is that you cannot hold on to your old self and grab the lifeline of transformation at the exact same time. The true test of faith isn't just nodding and acknowledging the rope is there, it's the active, genuinely frightening willingness to actually drop the broken planks.
Let's move on to Act 2, Zacchaeus and the Evidence of Transformation.
So what does dropping that plank actually look like in the real world? The text offers a historical case study. A guy named Zacchaeus. He was a corrupt chief tax collector in Jericho, and he was entirely out for himself. This brilliantly illustrates the clear difference between that transactional religion we talked about and actual, true transformation. Before meeting Jesus, Zacchaeus is blatantly corrupt. He's exploiting his neighbors, aggressively hoarding wealth, and just running a fraudulent system. But after a single encounter, the behavioral shift is absolutely staggering. He doesn't just offer a polite PR apology. Right there on the spot, he voluntarily pledges to give half of his possessions to the poor. Plus, he promises to repay anyone he's cheated. He literally drops the plank.
But the absolute wildest part is the scale of the repayment. He declares he'll repay his victims 4 times the amount he stole. Just imagine voluntarily telling the IRS you're going to pay a 400% penalty on your past taxes. No way, right? But think about the behavioral economics here. If you know you have to pay back $4 for every single dollar you extort moving forward, you are completely eliminating any financial incentive to be corrupt. Taking this radical voluntary financial hit proves that an internal fundamental transformation has actually occurred. He's simply no longer operating on his old rules of greed.
And this builds into something even bigger. Interestingly enough, Zacchaeus didn't just quit his job as chief tax collector. He didn't wander off into the desert to become a monk. He stayed right where he was in Jericho. But because he was the boss, and because he just adopted this entirely new standard of radical fairness and justice, the entire tax collection system under him would have to change too. He effectively transformed the culture of his environment from the inside out. He became a seed of real change right within his own workplace.
This brings us to Act 3, Justice, Resurrection, and the Wheat Seed.
So what exactly fuels this kind of radical behavioral shift? Well, the text points to core Christian doctrines as the ultimate catalyst. It's rooted in how this theology addresses human failure and divine justice. To wrap our heads around this, the source poses a profound philosophical question. If God is so loving, why couldn't he just speak a word from heaven and declare everyone forgiven? Like, why require the agonizing death of Jesus on a cross at all? The text offers a really striking analogy for this. Imagine a newly elected president who decides to pardon every single criminal in the country's prisons, just to show how loving and merciful he is. Sounds super generous, right? But what about the victims? What about the families whose lives were absolutely destroyed by scammers or violent offenders? If all crimes are just waved away with a single word, there is zero justice. The point is, true love literally cannot exist without absolute justice for the victims of wrongdoing.
And that is exactly why the Christian timeline exists the way it does. Christmas is the birth, the divine actually entering the human world. But Good Friday, the death of Jesus, that's the mechanism of justice. Because human wrongdoing can't just be ignored or swept under the rug, Jesus steps in to become the literal substitute. The argument is that he pays the penalty, satisfying the demands of justice so that forgiveness can be offered freely to humanity without violating fundamental moral law.
The text is very direct about this next point. If Jesus merely died, even if it was a totally noble death, he's just a dead hero, a martyr, a wise teacher who met a super tragic end. But conquering death, physically rising from the dead on Easter, is presented as the absolute linchpin of the whole faith. It's the proof of his divinity. It proves he actually has the authority to offer that rescue rope we were talking about earlier. Without the resurrection, there simply is no Christianity. It's this victory over death that supposedly gives believers the ultimate courage to let go of their broken planks because they know this life isn't the end. To explain this process, Jesus himself actually used a biological metaphor, the life cycle of a wheat seed. First, the seed has to fall into the dirt. Second, it essentially has to die to its original, safe form. It cracks wide open. Third, it absorbs all the nutrients around it. And finally, because of that death, it grows and multiplies into dozens of new seeds. Jesus was the ultimate wheat seed here, dying to multiply life. And within this theological framework, this life cycle is the exact blueprint for anyone claiming to follow him today.
Which leads us straight into Act 4, the reality of the muddy soil. The argument now pivots directly to you, the audience. If Jesus and Zacchaeus were seeds, what does it actually mean for you to be a wheat seed today? Well, it means you have to be planted. You cannot just stay safe and dry inside the seed packet. You have to enter the soil. And what's really interesting about this is how it completely dismantles the idea of a comfortable, sanitized faith. The truth about the soil? It is not fragrant, it is not clean, it is wet, it is muddy, it's full of earthworms, decay, and just mess. In our everyday lives, this muddy soil represents our real-world relationships, our difficult workplaces, our stubborn family members, the messy, super complicated realities of society. True faith, according to this text, isn't about escaping the mud so you can stay clean. It's about deliberately planting yourself directly into the messiest parts of life to bring about change and growth from the inside out.
And there's a really grave consequence to playing it safe and refusing to get in the mud. If you hold on to this good news too tightly, treating it like some exclusive private club membership, you're actually failing the core mandate. Imagine reaching eternity, and a dear friend, a coworker, or a family member looks at you and says, "Wait, you knew this truth? You had this lifeline the whole time and you never told me?" Refusing to enter the muddy soil just because we want comfort or because we're afraid it might be a little awkward has huge, eternal stakes for the people around us.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly challenging thought. The rescue rope has been thrown, the broken planks have to be dropped, and the absolute proof of that is a transformed life that flat out refuses to hide from the messiness of the world. The seed has to break open in the dirt to actually bring life. So, looking at your own life right now, your own workplace, your own family, are you willing to fall into the muddy soil? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it challenged your perspectives as much as it did mine. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.